an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering Siege and Storm, chapters 16, 17, and 18. In these chapters, the apparat finally catches up to Alina. She does not enjoy it. Also, Mal, blah, 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 wah, wah, wah. And he storms off, and frankly, goodbye. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you very much to Jamie for commissioning this episode. Jamie is here in the chat. Hi, Jamie. I'm sorry about that weird autocorrect that the phone did to me. I texted Jamie just before I started to remind her, and it just changed me when I said it's happening. It changed it to ha-pinion. H-A-PINYIN, which I don't know what that is. What is that? That's nothing. Guys, is it just me, or is autocorrect like way worse than it used to be? I feel like it's gotten a lot worse. Anyway. So these chapters, y'all, oh man. I'm going to have to force myself to go chronologically because I really want to just talk about the whole thing with Mal out of the gate, but I know that I'm going to focus on it for too long. So I'm going to start off with chapter 16 where I need to start. Alina goes to see David, who, for those who have forgotten, David is the nerdy fabricator that Genya has a massive crush on. And I love the fact that she's like, oh, somebody gave him a really bad haircut. And then she's like, oh my God, I bet he gave himself that really bad haircut actually. And I was like, yeah, you know what? That makes a lot of sense. So she asks him what he's working on. And he says, basically, like satellite dishes to magnify her power. Like he's working on solar panels, essentially. If I get it right, it will be a much bigger way to use the cut. And if you get it wrong, either nothing will happen or whoever's operating it will be blown to bits. Sounds promising. I thought so too, he said without a hint of humor, and went back to his work. David, I said. He looked up, startled, as if he'd completely forgotten I was there. I need to ask you something. What can you tell me about Ilya Morozova? Now, here comes this thing that I didn't even think of. That basically she's thinking that maybe Ilya Morozova is the same as the saint. Didn't even occur to me. I guess I probably should have thought of it, but I don't know. I just didn't make that connection at all. And when she asks him, I expected her to get some sort of academic assessment, but instead he gets really weird and nervous. And he says they called him the Bonesmith. And here comes a bit of a shock for me. Alina's like, why? Because he discovered these amplifiers? And David says he didn't find them. He made them. Oh, that changes everything. I'm over here thinking that these amplifiers are naturally occurring magical items. And if they were made by a human being, now I don't trust that at all. It's one thing if they're naturally occurring, I can trust that there is an inherent balance to the way nature works that will be reflected in the way these handle power. But if a human being with their meddling fucking fingers came up in here and decided that they were going to do something way better than what nature has done, oh, that never ends well, guys. That just doesn't, like, I shouldn't say it never ends well, because there are things that we've come up with that are actually better. I mean, modern broccoli and modern watermelon seem far superior based on our breeding. But this is just, it completely turned my vague idea in my head of what these amplifiers mean completely over, and made me go, oh no, oh no. Like, I just had a very strong reaction to hearing that these were created. She asks how. And he says after the Black Heretic was killed in the accident that created the fold, his son came out of hiding to take control of the Second Army. He had all of Morozova's journals destroyed. And she has to kind of be like, oh, wow, yeah, his son, totally. Because obviously that is still the Darkling, and he has been the same dude, just pretending to be this guy's son in order to, you know, not let people in on the fact that he is essentially immortal. I would like to know exactly what the Darkling is afraid of in terms of people knowing exactly who he is. I guess maybe it's all to like kind of snow everyone into thinking that he's the good guy. And the Black Heretic was like this ancient, terrible evil that he's attempting to right the wrongs of an ancestor. Like, that's the whole thing that he played on with her. So I guess that's what he's doing with everybody. And she's like, yeah, there's no way that motherfucker destroyed those journals. Like, he's definitely got them hidden somewhere. Maybe he just can't, like, lay hands on them or something right now. And she asks why his son was in hiding, just out of curiosity for what the story is that the Darkling came up with. And he says, a Darkling and his heir never live at the Little Palace at the same time. The risk of assassination is too great. And she's like, okay. Like, I really like her reaction, which is, I guess that's plausible enough that people who just take things for granted that their tradition would swallow that. I don't buy it, but I could see how people buy it. And I was like, yeah, that's a good point, because tradition is really one of those things that people just do not question. It's just how it's done, and we just accept it. And it's really bonkers when you begin to poke at it, how completely reactionary people are regarding anybody messing with their traditions. They take it so personally, like you're attacking them. And it's just people sort of take traditions on as like an element of their personality, so that it does feel like you are attacking them personally when you decide, oh, maybe we don't need to do this way anymore. And just everybody needs to just have their own fucking heads and ideas, you know? At the same time, I say that, I am somebody who really enjoys tradition, because it's sort of, for me, an interesting record of looking back at like your life and having done the same things on the same days and seeing how that like changed even while it stayed the same throughout your life. So it's just sort of an interesting, you know, it's like a little bit of a time capsule in a day, depending on what we're talking about when we say tradition. Anyway, I digress. So she asks why he would have destroyed the journals. And this dude says they documented Morozova's experiments with amplifiers. The Black Heretic was trying to recreate those experiments when something went wrong. And she says, oh, and that's how the fold was made. He says, yes. His son had all of Morozova's journals and papers burned. He said they were too dangerous, too much of a temptation to any Grisha. That's why I didn't say anything at the meeting. I shouldn't even know they ever existed. And she asks, well, then how do you know? And he's like, basically, this dude was like one of the most powerful fabricators to ever live. Perhaps the first ever fabricator. He's basically like a legend to all of us. So we definitely talk about him. It's just been passed down, you know, vocally. And she asks about other amplifiers, and he says the Stag is the only one that he had ever heard of. So she says, finally, David, why are you here? You fashioned the collar. You must have known what he intended. He swallowed. I knew he would be able to control you, that the collar would allow him to use your power. But I never believed. All those people. I make things. I don't destroy them. And she's sort of deciding whether or not he's telling the truth. Is he that foolish? Is he weak? Is he lying? Which of those is worse? And this sort of comes up a couple times. She has a conversation a little bit later and does the same, like, why are you here kind of thing. And essentially, the answer that she keeps getting is, I didn't think he was capable of doing what the fuck he did. Now, guys, I don't want to get political here, but can we just talk for a second about people who are just like, well, I know that, you know, he's got this incredible power and that he basically has no checks and balances on him, but, like, I didn't think he'd do that. Okay, so she decides to spend the rest of her time, basically, every bit of downtime she's got, she starts spending in the library in order to try and find out more about Ilya Morozova. It turns out he's the one who invented Grisha Steel. He's the one who created unbreakable glass. It says, and a compound for liquid fire so dangerous that he destroyed the formula just 12 hours after he created it. But any mentions of amplifiers or the bonesmith had been expunged. That didn't stop me from returning the next evening to bury myself in religious texts and any reference I could find to Sankt Ilya. Like most saints' tales, the story of his martyrdom was depressingly brutal. One day, a plow had overturned in the fields behind his home. Hearing the screams, Ilya ran for help, only to find a man weeping over his dead son, the boy's body torn open by the blades, the ground soaked through with his blood. Ilya had brought the boy back to life, and the villagers had thanked him for it by clapping him in irons and tossing him into a river to sink beneath the weight of his chains. And she talks about the details, and some people say he had kids, and some people say that he didn't, and some people say that, you know, it was a farmer, sometimes it was a mason, sometimes it was a woodworker. Different villages claim that he came from their village, which is something really, like, personally I find funny, because the town that I'm from in Texas called Denison is supposed to be where Eisenhower is originally from. I believe it's Eisenhower. And yet Eisenhower himself, like, doesn't entirely claim this town. And it's a running joke at how, I don't remember the town that he actually says he's from, but it's not Denison. And Denison constantly tries to claim him. And there's, like, a huge statue of him, like, near the freeway with this whole, like, arrangement of lights around it and everything. But Eisenhower was just kind of like, yeah, I don't know her. So she's in the library, and eventually Tolia comes and finds her and is just like, hey, dude, what are you doing? You're taking too much of a risk being in here all by yourself. And he asks her what she's reading, and he picks it up and is just like, oh, I know what this is all about. And she's really surprised, because this is a particularly, like, dense kind of Ravkin, liturgical. And she is trying to translate it and having a difficult time. And he says, it says, Saint Ilya the Beloved, Saint Ilya the Treasured. There are a few towns listed, though, places where he's said to have performed miracles. You should explore the chapel. I think there are some books in the vestry. And it says, I felt, he bent his head. It was just a bow, but he was still kneeling beside me, and there was something about his pose that sent a shiver up my spine. I felt as if he were waiting for something. Tentatively, I reached out and laid a hand on his shoulder. As soon as my fingers came to rest, he let out a breath. It was almost a sigh. We stayed there for a moment, silent in the halo of lamplight. Then he rose and bowed again. I'll be just outside the door, he said, and slipped away into the dark. So, he wanted her to bless him. And she kind of does. Like, she doesn't consciously be like, and here I bless you, my son. But she knows that he's wanting something, and she gives him the gesture of it. And I feel like this is setting a precedent. And I hope that she's, like, ready for that. Because she doesn't want people thinking she's a saint. But if anybody starts to see this sort of thing, that's going to take on a life of its own real quick. I don't feel like that'll be great for her. Mal returned from the hunt the next morning, and I was eager to tell him everything. What I'd learned from David, the plans for the new hummingbird, and my strange encounter with Tolia. So, she asks him how the hunt was, because reminder, Mal goes off on his little adventure with his people, and she kind of thinks that that'll be good for him to go off and, you know, be able to do some outdoors sort of stuff and be amongst folks that he can, like, get along with better, more than likely, than the people around her, who are very, very classist. And she is, at first, finding it sort of amusing, his stories about how drunk people got and the silly shit that they did. But then at one point he says when they were in their cups, some of the nobles made it clear they think all of the Grisha should be rounded up and executed. Saints, I breathed. They're scared. That's no excuse. I didn't say I agreed with them. I know. Anyway, I think I made a bit of progress. How did you manage that? Well, they liked that you served in the First Army and that you saved their prince's life. And it turns out that he sort of fudged the fact that, like, he was rescuing them at the time. Like, he's just, you know, he's doing what a good PR person does, which is reframes real stories to make it look a little bit different than maybe it actually was. I told them that you hate herring and that you love plum cake and that Anakuya took a switch to you when you ruined your spring slippers jumping in puddles. I wanted to make you human. All they see when they look at you is the Sun Summoner. They see a threat, another powerful Grisha like the Darkling. I want them to see a daughter or a sister or a friend. I want them to see Alina. And she says, do you practice being wonderful? And I was like, ugh, guys, I really want to like you too. And I just don't. And I don't know what to do about it. I don't know what to do about it, you guys. I feel bad. I just, you know, we'll get there. So they go into the chapel together. And Mal takes her hand as they walk up the aisle, and she's obviously sort of thinking about, you know, getting married and yada, yada, yada. And they look around. Everything is kind of like wet and mildewed over and moldy. And Mal says that there must be a leak somewhere. And all I could think is this someplace that, like, the apparat is hiding? And is that why he fucking smells like mold and mildew? Like, what exactly is the deal with the apparat smelling the way that he does and this place being how it is? It feels like there has to be a connection there. So she turns to go down the aisle, back outside with him, and she sees the Darkling standing there. And this was when I really first started to get irritated, because I don't see a good reason for her to not explain to Mal what's happening with her. There's just not a good enough reason to not tell him. Mal knows her well enough that if she explains, okay, look, this sounds insane. I know it does. But they are alone together for one of the only times that they've been able to manage it for a long time. It's fine if she doesn't want to talk about this in front of her other guards, other people. Like, that makes total sense. But it's Mal. This is the guy that you're supposed to trust with everything. And if you can't tell him about this, I don't really know what you're doing with him. Your partner is the person that you are supposed to be able to share your deepest fears and hopes with. And I already was annoyed that she hadn't talked to him about it before. When it happens here, I get particularly irritated. And then she finally decides to tell him later, and it's too late, and he doesn't want to listen. And, so she doesn't tell him. She obviously something spooked her, but she tries to be like, oh, no, nothing's wrong, nothing at all. And she's thinking about the Darkling's powers and the fact that he has these like creatures, and she wonders exactly how he has managed to do this. And how he is seeming to sort of project himself here. Like, is this in her mind? It seems to me that he always appears in places that are super shadowy. So I feel like he's got some sort of connection to the actual darkness. But whatever the case, she has to put it out of her head. And all of a sudden, the other prince, Vasily, turns up. And Vasily, as it turns out, is here to try to get Alina onto his side, because he knows whomever has the Sun Summoner on his side is going to have an advantage with the people and going to be probably taken more seriously and going to have the support of the army, yada, yada, yada. And he is assesses that if she wants to be queen, she should really be with him. To which she says something like, well, only a king can make a queen. To which he's basically like, oh, I mean, my dad's practically dead already. I mean, whatever. I'm ruling as we speak. And she thinks to herself, is that what you call it? I doubted Vasily would even be in Osalta if Nikolai didn't present a threat to his crown, but this time I held my tongue. You've risen high for a Karimzin orphan, he went on, but you might rise higher still. I can assure you, Moit Tsarevich, I said with complete honesty, I have no such ambitions. Then what do you want, Sun Summoner? Right now, I'd like to go have my lunch. You're a smart girl, he said, and I think you'll prove a useful one. I look forward to deepening our acquaintance. I would like nothing better, I lied. So he kisses her hand, and she wipes her hand on her dress, and it's just like, nah, which I found really funny. And when she goes and talks to Mal about it, I kind of wondered if he was going to be an asshole, but thankfully he finds it kind of funny. And then he says, I just pictured the Darkling being cornered by a sweaty duchess trying to have her way with him. And honestly, that was a really funny image to me. Like, the Darkling, and I'm sure he'd be suave and amazing at it, but that is really funny. Unbidden, I remembered Nikolai's kiss, the rough feel of his mouth on mine as he'd held me to him. I shook my head. They may be different, I reminded myself, but they both want to use you just the same. So then we go to chapter 17. And we get a little bit of her overall routine here. Every morning I met with my Grisha council, sometimes for a few minutes, sometimes for hours, to discuss intelligence reports, troop movements, and what we were hearing from the northern and southern borders. Nikolai still hoped to take the fight to the Darkling before he'd assembled the full strength of his shadow army, but so far, Ravka's network of spies and informants had been unable to discover his location. It was looking more and more likely that we'd have to make our stand in Osalta. Our only advantage was that the Darkling couldn't simply send the Nicovoya against us. He had to stay close to his creatures, and that meant he would have to march to the capital with them. The big question was whether he would enter Ravka from Fjerda or from the Shuhan. So they talk a little bit about the borders and what the strengths and weaknesses are in different areas, and who's going to be kind of guarding and on alert and where. Talking about the permafrost. It's heavily fortified, but that's a lot of territory to cover because they don't have an endless supply of people, and they're all regular human beings. Well, not all, but the ones that they are probably going to be sending up to some of these borders. And there's a sort of overlying sense of people seeming to think that this is all a bad and or stupid and or futile plot. And nobody really says it. It's just this sort of sense that Alina is picking up on. And finally, Nikolai has to say that the Grisha are, or not the Grisha, the Nikivoya are not indestructible, and the Darkling isn't either. I know. I shot him. And he's explaining this, and at one point, Paja says, "Do we know what happens to the Shadow Soldiers when we kill the Darkling?" And Alina is so glad that somebody asks the question and phrases it that way. When we kill the Darkling. Tentative, frightened, but it still sounded suspiciously like hope. So they are focusing a ton on defense. And Nikolai is getting very involved with all of the planning of it. And I like that there's a description of him trying to include himself in the projects, and then a lot of the Grisha being they humor him at first because they just are well, he's the prince and we have to be nice. But then they begin to realize that he understands things pretty well and has a bit of a mind of an engineer. And they actually start to include him in the conversations about how to design certain things. And there is this one moment that I assume this is the beginnings of what we see in the Six of Crows books. I was most disturbed by the experiments taking place behind the red lacquered doors of the Corporalki anatomy rooms, where they were collaborating with the fabricators to try to fuse Grisha steel with human bone. The idea was to make it possible for a soldier to withstand Nikivoya attack, but the process was painful and imperfect, and often the metal was simply rejected by the subject's body. The healers did what they could, but the ragged screams of First Army volunteers could sometimes be heard echoing through the halls of the little palace. Nothing quite makes me shudder the way that, medical experimentation does. And that just was a nightmare to me. I've been having nightmares every night, guys. I hope this doesn't give me another one. And she's talking about the strategy sessions with the king's advisors and how they go on for ages. And eventually, Vasily finds out that they're doing this, and he begins to insist on coming. And she is surprised that Nikolai greets him really enthusiastically. And I was like, well, Nikolai can't be a dick about it. He's got to, this is supposed to be the future king. He's got to appear to be putting what's best for Ravka ahead of his own, that's just good politics. And when he tries to sort of say, can't one of the ministers take care of this, and that? Because Nikolai gives him a proposal for an aqueduct to look at. Nikolai stops him and says, "You saw what happened when our father let others take over the business of ruling Ravka. We must remain vigilant." And when Vasily finally leaves with this stuff, Nikolai confesses to Alina, basically, he thinks that he can do everything the way that our father did it, which was barely show up, run around chasing women, and sleeping until noon and having parties. And he needs to realize that it's going to be a lot more than that. And maybe if he starts to get the picture, this won't seem quite as appealing to him. And she's like, I get that plan, but in the meantime, oh my God, he's so annoying. I love this. Vasily's presence ensured that the meetings ran twice as long. He postured and preened, weighed in on every issue, held forth at length on patriotism, strategy, and the finer points of diplomacy. I've never met a man who can say so much without saying anything at all, I fumed, as Nikolai walked me back to the little palace after a particularly wretched session. There's got to be something you can do. Guys, I love this because it's just so many of us can relate, I am certain, to long drawn out meetings. I remember even when I worked in retail at Whole Foods, there was a mandatory bi-monthly meeting that would either take place super late after the store closed at like 10:30 p.m. or it would take place super early before they began with the store opening at like 5:30 a.m. And it was mandatory. So if you had closed the night before, they did not care. You still had to come in at 6:30 or 5:30 for that meeting. And there was no point to it. There was absolutely no need for everybody to be there. It was just, it was the sort of information that could very easily be circulated amongst the teams if you decided to delegate it that way. And it just ruined everybody's goddamn day. Oh, I got so mad about it. With Nikolaya's help, I brought in armaments experts from Politsnaya to help familiarize the Grisha with modern weaponry and give them training in firearms. And I love this. She's doing all of this stuff with, like, you know, trying to teach them how to use different weapons and fighting styles. And Botkin is actually super duper excited about it because she'd been worried that he just would want to teach hand to hand. But anything that he gets to do that deals damage to people, he's 100% behind it. And he's very excited about the twins and how fucking furious they are. And he calls them dangerous boy, dangerous girl. So I like this moment where she's listening to Botkin and Sergei and Tamar talking about the twins and sort of joking around. And she has this, there's a bit of a temptation to participate in the conversation like she's hanging out with friends. And she has to force herself to sort of back away because she remembers that they weren't particularly friendly to her when she turned up. They weren't part of the crew that was trying to kick her out or anything. But she doesn't want to behave as if they're chummy because it feels like a lie. And not only that, but like the way that their status works now, she's just on a whole other level to them. Genya wouldn't care, I thought suddenly. Genya had known me. She'd laughed with me and confided in me, and no shiny kefta or title would have kept her from telling me exactly what she thought, or slipping her arm through mine to share a bit of gossip. Despite the lies she'd told, I missed her. This is one of those moments where, like, I definitely believe this. I believe her friendship with Genya especially, but it is weird to think, like, the way that Genya betrayed her. It's just... It's more than being like, oh, she lied to me. It's just so much more than that I don't know that I could move past that. Friendships are hard. So this boy, Adrik, comes up to her with his sister Nadia. And it turns out that Adrik was going to have graduated school by the end of this year if things had remained. But obviously everything is just such a tumult right now. And he wants to stay and fight. And basically, the two of them are coming to ask her permission. And when she asks Nadia, are you sure you want him to stay? Adrik starts to answer. And Alina says to him, I'm talking to your sister. If you fall to the Darkling's army, she's the one who will have to mourn you. Nadia paled slightly at that, but Adrik didn't flinch. I had to admit, he had mettle. If you're afraid to disappoint him, think what it will be like to bury him, I said. I knew I was being harsh, but I wanted them both to understand what they were asking. And she's like, yeah, I think I do. Like, he needs to fight. This is something that he's going to, like, there's a sort of vibe, too. If I tell him no, he's going to figure out a way to come back. Like, he'll do it anyway. So, let's see. Oh, okay. This is when she reflects on... Sorry, I hit my mic. She reflects on Mal and the fact that he has been away a lot. Sometimes he was just gone for an afternoon, sometimes a few days. If I was honest, the days where he was gone were almost easier. When he was at the little palace, I felt guilty for not being able to spend more time with him, and I hated the way the Grisha ignored him or talked down to him like a servant. As much as I missed him, I encouraged him to go. It's better this way, I told myself. So this is when she's looking at him and Zoya is standing next to her and basically talking about how he's so fine, I wouldn't mind to hit that, yada, yada, yada. And finally, she's kind of pushed here And I don't mean that Zoya pushes her, although she does. But I mean that there's just so much baggage in Alina's head surrounding Zoya that she kind of lets that get the better of her here. And she demands to know why she's here when Zoya does not like her and never has, and why is she following her now? And Zoya sort of says, like, well, what choice do I have? And she's like, what do you mean, what choice do you have? The Darkling would be delighted to have you back. And she says, you would have done anything for the Darkling's attention. What changed? What changed? She choked out. Her lips thinned and her fists clenched at her sides. I had an aunt who lived in Novosibirsk, a niece. The Darkling could have told me what he meant to do if I could have warned them. And when Alina notices that Zoya is kind of scared that she may ask her to leave, it gives her, as she puts it, a guilty little thrill. And at this point, she says, I was ashamed of the pleasure I'd felt at watching her squirm. Bagra's voice echoed in my ears. You're taking to power well. As it grows, it will hunger for more. I still don't like you, Starkov, and this is Zoya. I never will. You're common and clumsy, and I don't know why you were born with such power. But you're the Sun Summoner, and if you can keep Ravka free, then I'll fight for you. Well, are you sending me away? You can stay, I said, for now. Is everything all right? Mal asked. So, Mal and her go for a walk. And this is where things get, like, we start down the path that we finish later, I believe, after the party. Jamie says, I love Zoya. Yeah, Zoya's, I mean, I don't really, she's obviously a snob, but I don't inherently hate snobs, being as I am also a snob, depending on the situation. And she does also do something else, which is she says to Alina, when you're done with Mal, will you let me know? Which the two of them kind of have thought that they were being really discreet. But it turns out everybody fucking knows that they're into each other. And there is no secret here of any kind. So we go to the final chapter, chapter 18. And they go to this party that is supposed to be like a fortune teller party in disguise. They have, everybody's wearing masks and these dresses and whatnot. And this turns out to be a bad idea. They think that they can kind of fly under the radar, but it doesn't, it seems like there are people watching everywhere based on what the apparatus says. He's just got spies all over the place. I can't help but wonder about Toya after that whole conversation, but I might be wrong there. And there are a couple people that come up and want their fortunes read, and they have a really good time sort of like doing these exaggerated fortunes that they tell them. One girl, Mal tells her she's going to meet a handsome stranger, but then Alina bumps in and is like, yeah, and he's going to be a really evil, terrible, cruel man. Stay away from him. You should marry the fat, ugly man. He will be the one to make you happy. And this other dude says, when Mal tells him your wife will bear you 3 handsome sons, the companion of this dude says, then you'll know they aren't yours. I'm assuming that these two dudes are like hooking up and he doesn't sleep with his wife. And so that's what the joke is, I think. Have to congratulate the footman, he roared. I hear all the best families have bastards, chortled his friend. We all have dogs too, but we don't let them sit at the table. I grimaced beneath my mask. I had a sneaking suspicion they were talking about Nikolai. I had forgotten that was like a question. And at this point, Alina cuts in and starts to do the, "Oh dear, so sad. You will go bald, very bald." And she tells the other guy basically that he's going to catch VD and his dick is going to shrink to nothing. And then they get interrupted because a fight breaks out. And Tamar comes over and is just like, "Hey, we got to go." They've left Tolia at home because Tolia is too goddamn big. And there's no disguising who that is if they go out with him. So Tamar is the only one here. And she sees these like fight that broke out. They both begin to usher her out, but then somebody looks like they're like trapped under a table. So Mal stays behind to help them and sends Tamar out with her. She winds up alone because there's this like sound, and then Tamar is apparently gone. And all of a sudden, here is the apparat smelling like mildew, being a fucking creep. And he tells her, "Every day your holy army grows, drawn by the promise of your light. They wait only for you to lead them." And she's like, "Are you talking about the poor, starving people that are pilgrims outside? Because they are no army, and that's just like exploiting them. Are you kidding me?" And he says, "There are others, soldiers. You are the daughter of Karimzin, reborn of the fold." "I didn't die," I said furiously. "I survived because I escaped a Darkling and I murdered an entire skiff of soldiers in the Grisha to do it. Did you tell your followers that?" "Your people are suffering. Only you can bring about the dawn of a new age, an age consecrated in holy fire." And she's looking at him like, "Man, I cannot figure out if you believe this or if this is just some act you're putting on. I don't know what your fucking deal is." And she asks, like, "Oh, so who's going to rule this age?" Thinking that she can trip him up into admitting that really what he wants is to be the right hand of the saint and prove that this is something that he's doing for his own gain, because she just can't seem to get a bead on his whole angle here. He says, "You are not yet strong enough to face the Darkling. I can change that." And that stops her cold. And she says, "All right, tell me what the fuck you know." And he says, "Join me and all will be revealed." She says, "Where is the Firebird?" And he smiles at her. And then she says, "Tell me, priest, or I'll cut you open right here and your followers can try to pray you back together." With a start, I realized that I meant it. For the first time, he looked nervous. Good. Had he expected a tame saint? "I do not know, I swear it. But when the Darkling left the little palace, he did not realize it would be for the last time. He left many precious things behind, things that others believed long since destroyed." And she's just like, "Okay, that has to be the journals. That has to be." And at this point, Alina like gets shouted, and Mal appears, and the apparat like ducks through some trees, and Tamar follows him and cannot find him. He's just managed to completely vanish, and she doesn't understand how he even did it. She hung her head. "Forgive me. I'd never seen her look so downcast." "It's all right," I said, my mind still churning. Part of me wanted to go back down that alley and shout for the apparat, demand that he show himself, hunt him through the city streets until I found him, and pried the truth from his lying mouth. So they head home, and on the way they're discussing that clearly that brawl was meant to be a distraction. That was an accident. They're trying to figure out who the hell could have known that they like had gone to the party. Maybe somebody just saw them leaving. Maybe one of the servants. And she tells them the generalities of what he said without explaining the journals thing. And she says about the soldiers, as she puts it in quotes whenever she sort of says it. "I don't know what he intends to do with them. March them against the king? Send them to fight the Darkling's horde? I'm already responsible for the Grisha. I don't want the burden of an army of helpless Otkazatsia? I think that's how you say that. Odkazatsya. Which I believe is just like regulars. Any normal people. We're not all quite so feeble, said Mal, an edge to his voice. He's exploiting these people's hope. Is it any different than Nikolai parading you from village to village? Nikolai isn't telling people I'm immortal or can perform miracles. No, Mal said, he's just letting them believe it. And he wants to know why she's so quick to defend him, and this is the prelude to their actual fight. So she goes back to her room, and he tells her that he wants to see her and that she should come to target practice tomorrow. But she has to do this meeting with these Kirch bankers because they need funding for this war, and the bankers will only agree if they get to meet her and get proof that she's the Sun Summoner. And Mal says, tell him you're sick. Tell him you're busy. Other Grisha take time to. I'm not other Grisha, I said, more harshly than I intended. I know that, he said wearily. He let out a long breath. Saints, I hate this place. I blinked, startled by the vehemence in his voice. You do? I hate the parties. I hate the people. I hate everything about it. I don't belong here. Alina, don't tell me you haven't noticed. Nikolai says everyone adores you. They're amused by me, Mal said. That's not the same thing. Do you know I actually miss being on the run? Even that filthy little boarding house in Crofton and working in the warehouse. At least then I felt like I was doing something, not just wasting time and gathering gossip. You take every chance to get away. You don't have to accept every invitation. He stared at me. I stay away to protect you, Alina. From what? I asked incredulously. He stood up, pacing restlessly across the room. What do you think people ask me on the royal hunt the first thing? Is it true that you're tumbling the Sun Summoner? What's it like with a saint? Does she have a taste for trackers, or does she take all of her servants to her bed? I stay away to put distance between us, to stop the rumors. I probably shouldn't even be in here now. Why didn't you say something? What could I say? And when? I barely see you anymore. I thought you wanted to go. I wanted you to ask me to stay. I feel you slipping away from me, and I don't know how to stop it. Ever since you put on that second amplifier, you've been different. When you split the dome, the way you talk about the Firebird, I heard you speaking to Zoya the other day. She was scared, Alina, and you liked it. All I can see is the toll it's taking. You chose this. You have a purpose. I don't even know what I'm doing here anymore. And she says, we came here for Ravka, and he says, no, that's why you came here. I came here for you. But that doesn't seem to matter anymore. Do you realize this is the first time we've really been alone in weeks? And he tries to kiss her, and at this point, she sees the Darkling again and stiffens and kind of pulls away as a reflex. And he takes her doing this as her not actually wanting to be with him anymore. And when she tries to explain, he doesn't want to listen. She tries to say the Darkling in order to start explaining, and he says, I don't want to hear about the Darkling anymore, or Ravka, or the amplifiers, or any of it. I'm done. I know you haven't much experience, but I've kissed enough girls to know what it means when they flinch. Don't worry, it won't happen again. So he leaves, and the Darkling is still standing there, and he brushes his fingers over her face and then kisses her cheek. And that is the end of the chapter. Now, you guys know what I'm going to say, right? Mal, honestly, get the fuck over yourself, dude. She wants to help a country full of people because she is the sole possessor of a power that can save everyone. Did you think that you would be able to accompany her here and it be like it's been, but yet she's just a hero out of pure circumstance? What did you think this was going to look like? Did you think that y'all were going to go to war within 3 weeks and win and be done, and you two could just retire? What exactly were you picturing when she said she wanted to run the Second Army, my dude? It's so, like, the thing about this is, I understand wanting to spend time with a person. I understand being resentful of the fact that what they do takes them away from you. But part of what he loves about her, or so I thought, is the fact that she gives a fuck about people. And that she's trying to help because she's the only one who can. And I was under the impression that if she did not want to do this, if she didn't want to help everybody the way she is, that maybe that would be a strike against her in Mal's book. But what it feels like is he just wants her to neglect her responsibilities and not take seriously what it is she's trying to do. Like this meeting with these bankers in order to get funding for a war. A war is incredibly expensive. This is actually a pretty important thing she's just about to do. That you're like, oh, just tell them you're sick. Mal, what are you doing? The idea of being this lacking in support, I just can't understand how he can say he loves her, but then not respect this part of who she is. And don't get me wrong, the fact that he's treated poorly by everybody, as he puts it, they are amused by me. That is a feeling that I am familiar with. I had a friend who had a lot of more wealthy friends one time in my life and was invited to a party with all of them. And I thought that it was like in an effort to sort of get me to mingle with her people. But instead it wound up being this weird thing where she sort of like asked me questions about what I did for a living in front of everybody in this way that felt very much like I was a curiosity, because all of them were in grad school, but I wasn't, because I could not afford grad school. And that was just not something I was doing. And so it was sort of, it felt really othering. It was extremely uncomfortable for me. So I understand that feeling and being sort of treated like a bit of a joke, but I don't know what it is exactly he wants her to do. It feels like really what he wants is for her to drop everything and to stop fighting for this and run away with him. That's the sense of it that I'm getting. And that just sort of flies in the face of who she is and what her heart is. So I don't understand claiming to like love a person and then something that is so fundamental to who they are, telling them you want them to stop being that thing. You don't love her then, dude. You just want it to all be about you. It's just so incredibly like self-absorbed, and it's obviously been building up over time. And it's like, again, I do understand feeling this way. I really get the emotion of it, but coming out and saying this the way that he does to her, expecting her to do, it's like he doesn't have anything specific that he's like, can't you do this and that to make this easier on the two of us? Can't you? It's just an airing of grievances with no problem solving attached and no feeling of like the scene ends because he tries to kiss her and she pulls away because she sees the Darkling, and he reacts like she's rejecting him. If she had just had sex with him right here, would that have fixed it? Is that all he really wants, is to like have occasional illusions of being a couple? I just don't really understand what he thought this was going to be. And when you have the kind of power that she has, which is an exact opposite of the person who's about to ruin the world, why would you not expect that person to do what they can to stop it? And that is going to be a full-time job until they are done. The idea that she was going to just do a 9 to 5, 40-hour work week and have nights and weekends with him, it's just not. You don't even get that when you work in a restaurant. You don't even get that, what are you thinking during a war? Being the figurehead and the one with the power. Guy. It's just, I don't know. I had no tolerance for it, guys. I really didn't. And then the fact that he doesn't want to listen to her when she's trying to explain, finally, it was a combination of things. It was partially, I wanted her to explain this ages ago, and I hated that the author decided to make her resist telling him clearly, specifically, so that she could have this moment. It felt contrived and really cheap. Obviously, this is why she didn't have her tell him, so that there could be this wild misunderstanding. And then I didn't like the fact that she's attempting to talk to him finally, and he doesn't want to hear anything. All he says is, "Tell me you didn't flinch." Well, she's trying to explain why to you, though. And every time she starts a sentence, you interrupt her. So it made me really frustrated with Alina, and it made me hate Mal even more. And so it sort of ends with her leaning her head on the door and being like, "I can fix this. I can make this right." And I was like, you can't, though, because this isn't your problem. Mal is being an asshole. If this were an Am I the Asshole on Reddit, it would be Mal that's the asshole. He's making a ton of assumptions, too. When she pulls away, he's like, "Is it Nikolai?" Bitch, look. You know, and I know, that she's attracted to Nikolai, even though she hasn't admitted it to herself, sure. But we also know that she's not out here asking herself, "Oh my God, which one of them do I want? I can't decide." It's been Mal the whole time, for sure. That's all it's been. You can be attracted to somebody and not have them be in the running at all. So I hate that too. This fucking insecurity that comes out. Dude, he's assigning all of this value judgment to certain things, but then getting mad when those same value judgments are applied to him. And honestly, I just don't want her to go chasing after him trying to fix this. Mal has been a hindrance, and I felt that way since the beginning. He's been super frustrating. And every interaction that they have had, unless they are having light banter to establish the fact that they like each other at all, every other conversation they have is them fighting over this. And it's just such a basic fucking thing that if he wasn't on board with this, then he should have got out, and I just have no sympathy for him anymore. He's tiresome. It's the sort she's just fallen into this trap where in order to make things interesting, she's leaning on relationship drama. And that can be interesting if you really are invested, but the couple has to feel real to begin with. And these two, it has never felt real to me. That's just kind of where I'm at with them. The first time we meet them, he's super hot and she's all sickly and pining after him and he doesn't notice. Then she finally comes into her power and she's at the, little palace, and he comes in and shows up and is a total douchebag to her right out of the gate for reasons that we don't even understand or know yet. And then they go on the run together and are immediately scooped up by the Darkling and everything goes really badly wrong. They escape and manage to be on their own for a very short time, and we don't get to really see almost any of that, of them just being a couple. And then they are scooped up by the Darkling again. It's just been nothing but fights and drama and fights and drama. And never has there felt like there is mutual support from either one of them. They're not a good couple. They shouldn't be together. They have their own shit to work out. And he is extremely entitled and draining. And she is single-minded. And, you know, she's over here saying, well, it's kind of easier when he's not around. Well, girl, what does that fucking tell you? That is a clear waving red flag. If something's easier when your partner's not around, that's not how that should go. You should need them around to be support. Get by when they're not there, sure. But when they are, it should be better, not worse. Just saying. It's a very, very easy metric. So anyway, that was the end of these chapters, and I just kind of want Mal to die at this point. So I'll just say it. I hope he's dead by the end of this book, beginning of the next book. Fingers crossed, Mal's dead. So with that, I'm going to wrap up. Thank you again so much, guys, for being in the chat. And thank you, Jamie, for commissioning this episode. And I will be seeing y'all again soon with a new one. Until then, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.